what I'll show you next is, just briefly, since we're running a little bit out of time, I was talking about darkening this part. There's a lot of different methods that you could use to do that. I mean, one is I could also just choose the quick selection tool and try to select. Whoops, boy, that's strange.
Run on the right layer.
Oh, right. Thanks. So I could select that if I wanted to, and it actually comes out fairly decent. You could just select that. You could choose the curves, and then I could darken that a little bit. And that tones down the brighter rock here, so your eye doesn't go out of the frame. Your eye then looks more toward the upper parts of the rock and the sky. Another way to do that is through layers, which I'll just briefly go through layers. It's something that you could helps to practice quite a bit on. There's under layer, there's something called adjustment layer. And so what we're doing is the background image is something that we're looking at, and we could create a second layer that you could just work on that particular layer. And it has virtually all of the same tools that you could use under image. I could choose curves here, and it'll ask me, do I want a new layer, and I'll say yes. So over here and under layers, it creates a layer called Curves 1. In the properties, it'll open up a tiny little curve box. So it's curves, a miniature version of the bigger curves that when I was just opening up curves by itself. And so I could darken the image. I'm just looking at this part. I'm ignoring this because don't worry that the entire picture is getting dark. So I look at that, and that's getting dark. I go back to my curves layer here, put the cursor right in the middle of the white rectangle. I click once on that, and if you look back toward the properties, the whole properties box have changed. I make sure that these two foreground and background color squares, the foreground is white, the background is black. Mainly, the important thing is that the foreground is white. I go to invert here on the properties box. I click on that, and it basically reverts back to the original tone, the brightness that I had it at before I made the curves change. If you notice that the curves box is now turned black, so that's black. I go to the tools bar, and I find the brush tool. And so that can create essentially a brush. Think of an artist brush of various sizes. I could use the bracket, the right bracket to make it bigger, the left bracket to make it smaller. So I'll zoom in on the picture that I need to do just to make it a little bit easier. I'll go to the brush. And I'll basically paint over the area that I want to darken. So I'll keep that. There's also, you can do an opacity. I'll set it at 100, and you can see it'll immediately change. You can see it immediately darkens it at basically 100% of what it was doing. Whoops. There. Most of the time, I set it at about 10 to 20 because then you can do it gradually. You could paint, and you could check your results. You could paint again, and you sort of keep doing it. You move it around basically like a wand, where you don't want any kind of straight line to show up in your picture. And you can see as this will get darker and darker. As I move this around, I click once, I hold the mouse down, then I release the mouse, then I repeat that, and it'll get darker and darker as I keep clicking the mouse. The way to check it is you could hold down the Alt or the Option key, and you click on the little rectangle, and it'll show you the area that you've just painted. And the wider it is, the more that the layer below shows through. In other words, the darker layer. You do the same commands, and it'll go back. So you can keep doing this, and you can make this as dark as you want, or as light as you want. You're essentially making the layer below show through, and so that'll create a second layer here. And this is something that you can save. You can do multiple layers. You can just keep adding layers here. Different commands, curves, hues, saturation. You can work on individual parts of the picture by using the brush tool, and you can save that. You can save all of those layers as either a Photoshop file or a TIFF file. I just save it as a TIFF. I think they're pretty much the same. It'll often say it'll want to save it as a copy, so I'll just add copy to that, and then it'll let me do that again, because it'll under Save Options. If you check layers, it'll save all of the layers so that you can go back. This will create a master file for you. You can go back into that file, and then you could pick each layer, and you could change it. If you suddenly decide, well, maybe I made that a little bit too dark, or I want to change the color slightly a little bit more, you can go back and do that. Antoine.
I mean, just a comment. That's amazing, because this allow you to have really a granular control and
Yes.
really a more artistic approach to your. And that remind me how, as a printer in the lab, you do when you dodge under the larger, and that's the same idea behind it in a way.
Right. This Antoine's question is just about how much control that this allows you to have, and you have a lot of control over specific parts of the picture, which often you need in night sky pictures. There's the sky you need to deal with in a certain way. The foreground, there might be two separate parts of the foreground that you want to deal with in separate ways, depending on what kind of light is falling on it. So this does allow you a lot of control. Mari.
Could you have used that for lightening the other rock, but with a lighter adjustment layer behind it?
Yeah, because then I could now select curves.
You create one lighter adjustment layer and one darker adjustment layer. You can sort of dodge and burn at will all over the.
Yeah. So say I want the left rock to be lighter. I'll create another layer. I'll say, okay, that's about as light as I want. There's a lot of self-control, because you have to completely ignore the rest of the picture. You have to really just focus on the area that you want, and put the rest of this out of your mind, which can be difficult. So you go back to the little rectangle, put your cursor there, you click on that. The properties box changes. You click on invert, and that's that. Now we're back to where we started before I made that second curves. I go to my brush. I've got my brush, and then now I could brush along here at 20%. I'll go to 50% to make it a little bit faster. So now I'm just lightening the left side rock. So I've darkened this rock on the right side. I've lightened this rock, and they're two separate layers now. And I could save this whole image with all of the layers. I'll open up in Photoshop, and the layers box will look like this when I open it up. I can go to this layer, and I could say, well, maybe I don't want this as dark, or maybe I want this a lot darker. So then I could darken this even more if I wanted to do that. Or I could just continue adding on more layers and working on different parts of the picture. So it is a real powerful way to deal with the specific parts of your picture, which is really nice. Let's see. So I'll stop here. I don't want to run too far over because I'm a little hungry. So, but thanks a lot for coming for tonight's session, and hopefully we'll put this up on the YouTube channel, and we'll people who you'll be able to see this again, and also people who weren't able to can do it. A lot of the information that I talked about, especially things like curves and the hue, saturation, and the selection, it's in the Photographing the Night Sky, the PDF guide that I handed out with all the various classes. So in the processing section, there's sort of an outline, and there's this outline that I will also post on a Google Drive that I went through, and I said there's a couple things I didn't, a couple minor things that I didn't talk about, but I could answer questions on email if you want to do that, or we could just have another meetup and keep talking.